Deputy Ryan. Deputy Clare Daly, please.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle, and I'd like to start by maybe reading an email from a resident who had hoped to be here last night, and he said, "Myself and my partner live 200 metres from the main south runway at Dublin Airport. We're actually inside the perimeter of DAA lands with only one road in and out. God forbid there would ever be an accident or a plane crash. We are now at a point where our home is just unbearable. A night's sleep is a thing of the past, with the pictures dancing on the wall, the headboard on the bed vibrating, with the whole house. DAA don't seem to have any concern for us in any way, and they are taking on more contracts every day, with the airport being so busy that these flights are now happening in the middle of the night. Maastricht, Moldova and so on." Minister, this discussion isn't about runways, it's not about jobs, it's about noise. It's specifically about the impact of noise on residents in airport communities. This is not something that's a figment of people's imagination. In actual fact, it's a very real and recognised threat to human health and well-being. And in your speech yesterday, you talked about the existing conditions on the second parallel runway at Dublin Airport and said that, of course, the DAA will be applying to change these conditions, almost implying that they were a relic of some distant past. But you know what? The reality is that the conditions put in place at the time when the planning permission was given to the second parallel runway actually took place at a time when our knowledge of the impact of noise was not as great as it is today. And if anything, the restrictions that are in place do not go far enough. Now, the regulation that's in place before us today actually places an obligation on the Airport Authority to mitigate against noise impact. Noise considerations now are not an optional extra, they're an obligation. And the hierarchy as set out in the balanced approach means that noise consideration on adjoining communities has to be legally addressed. This is an incredibly big deal, and I think we have to start at that point, because even in 2007, when On Board Planola's inspector actually refused the planning permission to the second parallel runway on noise issues, he said the full nature and extent of the increase in night noise had not been satisfactorily identified and qualified. He said the proposed mitigation measures in relation to insulation of schools was inadequate, having regard to the correlation between noise and children's cognitive development. And he said the increase in aircraft noise, both day and night, coupled with the increased risk in terms of public health and safety, would seriously injure the amenities of properties and community facilities in the area. Now, we know, of course, that his opinion was overruled and On Board Planola gave permission, albeit on the basis of two very strict conditions. However, 2 years later, in 2009, the World Health Organization introduced and amended their night noise guidelines, and they said, in relation to the evidence for night noise exposure, the World Health Organization has indicated that 40 decibels should be the target to protect vulnerable groups, particularly children, the chronically ill and the elderly, with 55 decibels being the interim target. Now, noise levels between 40 decibels and 55 decibels at night, according to the World Health Organization, lead to adverse health effects among the exposed population. Many people have to adapt their lives to cope with the noise at night. Vulnerable groups are more severely affected. This is the reality that we're dealing with, and this legislation and the designation of the competent authority is designed to adjudicate upon. And the fact that the existing insulation programme on offer from the DAA to adjoining residents is only available starting at decibels of 63 decibels, and that the relocation programme exists at 69 decibel, just shows how out of touch and actually behind the curve we are in terms of the serious impact of noise on human health and well-being. So I suppose my starting point is that this regulation is incredibly important. It's about formalising a competent authority with the power to order measures to deal with noise. And that's an incredibly good thing, and it's a very important and welcome thing. I have to say, even the DAA itself, in its kind of lobbying letter that it sent to all around of us, said they were at pains to stress this when they said it's essential that this legislation is not incorrectly viewed as a proxy for debating the new runway. A wide range of potential noise mitigation measures and stakeholder views arising. They say this is about a new competent authority on a totally independent basis. And they are, of course, right. Now, it's an awful pity, of course, that their statement then goes on to contradict that lofty reality, because they say the time window for delaying such decisions is closing with every passing week, the likelihood that airlines have no option but to relocate to other countries and so on. And then they do a big section on the new runway, precisely undermining their opening statement that this isn't about the new runway, when they're at pains to say, pending regulatory clarity, Dublin Airport will have about 40% less running capacity at key periods and so on, and in practice this means that no growth at key times of the day will be possible. Let's be clear here. What they're really saying is that pending the completion of the runway, so they are linking it to the runway, but this is in effect, in my opinion, some sort of a backdoor blackmail. The idea that billions of euros are going to be spent on a runway that will have less capacity is utter nonsense. And when you look at the phraseology, it's very cleverly worded. They talk about, oh, it's a reduction of capacity at key times. Doesn't talk about the fact that the overall capacity is, of course, going to be massively increased. We have to get real here. Balanced development is necessary to protect human health. It is a fact that 99 flights operate presently towards in the night time or in the exclusionary zones. Under the conditions that exist once the second runway is commissioned, that will fall by about 33%. But it's not unusual to have nighttime restrictions, and that's not something to be threatened. The problem with this legislation is, as far as I can see, that the Minister and the Department have framed the discussion precisely in the context of lifting and amending the two existing restrictions on nighttime conditions. We saw it in the briefings that we got from your officials. All the talk started with the planning application process, whereas in actual fact the establishment of the competent authority and the way the bill is structured is much more important in the sense of dealing with overall complaints of balancing the impact of noise. And I have to say there's an incredible irony. In a previous discussion in the context of the importance of Dublin Airport, you said, Minister, this doesn't mean that the authority can ride roughshod over the sensibilities or the lives of people who live in the area. And that's what the regulation is supposed to be designed to do. But the way you have handled this process, attempting a number of weeks ago to ram this through and put it on the order paper without the bill even being published, the efforts to seek to have committee stage next week, the week before Christmas, when this process hadn't even been concluded, I have to say is an absolute affront to democracy, and the manner in which you've handled this is an utter shambles. In March 2016, we were told that the Attorney-General and the Department of the Environment were in consultation regarding the implementation of that regulation for June 2016. In September of that year, you told us that the IAA had been selected as the competent authority and that you hoped to finalise the necessary standing order within a statutory instrument within a few weeks. 6 months on, in February 17, you told us that the delay was because of legal aspects that are being looked at. You said you were sorry that you'd hoped to have it done by 2016 and it was now 5 or 6 weeks late. But the reason for the delay was it was indicative of the fact that the Office of the Attorney-General was determined to ensure that the rights of residents would be protected. You went on to say that there would be a requirement to introduce a statutory instrument, and that you saw the IAA as the best fit to deal with noise management at Dublin Airport, in line with what was happening in Europe and in international civil aviation. You also said that your officials were currently engaged with the Office of Parliamentary Counsel to finalise details of the statutory instrument. Yet 4 months after that, in June last year, you told us that the Attorney-General was still actively engaged with the Parliamentary Council and the Advisory Council, and that he just looked at the 7th and hopefully last and final draft, which you told me will be finalised by the end of that week, and that it was a top priority for the new Attorney-General. Well, I have to say it gives a whole new meaning to the word priority. It's utterly shocking that at that time you said there was broad agreement that the IAA is best positioned to take on this role and to do it to the highest standard of professional competence. It's a strong and recognisably verified track record in the areas of aviation safety and inspection, functions which it already has legal responsibility. Making it responsible for noise regulation, you said, makes sense. And most of us, to be honest with you, actually agreed with you. So can you tell me this? After all that engagement of top legal minds for over a year, with multiple drafts of legislation, and yet 4 months after that, all of that is stood on its head, all gone. The IAA wasn't a fit because it wasn't independent after all. You have to answer that. How in God's name did that happen? Because you know what? It doesn't add up. And it was an insult that 4 months after that, you actually appointed Fingal County Council. So having said that the reason why you couldn't have the IAA was that they didn't have the necessary staffing, reporting, accountability and funding arrangements required to meet the new benchmark of independence, meant that they weren't a viable option, that you then gave it to Fingal, who certainly didn't have that. And we have the utterly bizarre situation and unique situation that no other jurisdiction in the European Union has selected an organisation like Fingal County Council. 8 of the member states are exempt from this provision because their airports are too small. 8 of them have designated the Civil Aviation Authority, i.e. the IAA equivalent. That's actually the most popular choice. 5 member states have designated a government department, 2 have designated multiple bodies, 2 haven't done anything yet, and you say that 3 have designated a local authority or federal authority, and you put us in with Germany and the UK. But it's not a fair comparison, because in Germany and the UK, the Ministry for Transport is involved. It's not a fair or equal comparison. So here we are, if you like, back at the beginning. The IAA was the most popular choice with citizens. It's the vehicle used by most countries, and whatever objection you had before to using them on the grounds of independence, there is no objection now on the basis of your decision to separate the functions of the IAA between their commercial air navigation tasks and their independent regulation of air navigation services. And only yesterday I asked you about progress in this regard, and you told me it was at a very high level in the departments, that it provides sounder governance and organisational basis for enhancing regulatory functions into the future, which is needed to match the ever-growing regulatory demands, particularly in the aviation industry and security, emanating from the EU and ICAO. Exactly where this regulation comes from. There's already been engagement, top-level bodies, technical. This is well underway already. So I suppose what I want to say is that while it's going to take a bit of time to give those functions of the IAA into the Commission for Aviation Regulation, it's already well underway. It's recognised that the officials' expertise to deal with the noise regulation issue doesn't reside anywhere at the moment. So there's no reason why the CAR cannot be upskilled or contract in that expertise in the way in which your officials told us Fingal was going to have to do it. Because I have to put it to you that it makes total and utter sense to appoint now in this newly split IAA environment, which is imminent, or at least in the near future, to give this function to the CAR. Because, as Deputy Ryan said, nobody on the opposition is going to live with Fingal County Council, and this will not progress unless you address this issue. Because it is a requirement to have an independent authority. Fingal doesn't even look independent. The DAA have told us they don't really care who it is, they just want it. Fingal, to be honest, don't really want it. No other country has it. So this issue now rests with you, and I put it to you that you actually have some serious thinking to do over Christmas, because when I raised it with you before, you said there was no plan B. Well, you better start putting on your thinking cap and getting to one, because the community is not going to put up with anything less, and we will be tabling amendments to have the CAR as the competent authority in this bill, and you have to start listening to that situation, because as far as we're concerned, the bill has been structured in a manner to facilitate the DAA's efforts to lift the nighttime restrictions. Even the way it's phrased, the path for residents to invoke the action of the competent authority is not actually clear in the legislation at all. I think it's very important that we would put on the record, in case there's any attempt to spin what's been said on the opposition benches. Nobody is anti-airport. I made my livelihood in the airport. My constituents, friends and colleagues live in the airport, love the airport and so on. This is an industry which is incredibly important. But it's also the case that there's an industry which cannot carry on in an unfettered manner. The impact of climate change, for example, is a very, very severe one, and airlines and aviation have to factor that into account. And nighttime restrictions have been factored in practically every single other airport because of the impact on human health and society. And probably the best fit for Ireland is Manchester Airport. And currently Manchester has a restriction on night flights of 7% of night flights. In Dublin at the moment, it's 14%. They brought in a huge amount of measures to control the use of noisy aircraft at night. They deal with noise quotas, that if you want to fly at night, you've got to bring in a lower noise aircraft, and on and on. I haven't got the time really to address the points about the restrictions that are in there. But they have multiple restrictions between the hours of 11 o'clock at night and 7 o'clock in the morning, very much, but in a much more meatier way, if you like, than we have here. And that's the direction that we have to go in. I mean, the idea that the airlines are going to uproot and go to another jurisdiction and thousands of jobs are going to be lost is utterly ridiculous. It's exactly what Deputy Ryan said last night. It is going to have an impact on their profits. But that's a legal requirement now, because the implication of noise has to be factored in. And when the original runway was given planning permission, if you like, strict nighttime restrictions and noise were put in place, and as a result the requirement for insulation was more lax. So if there's to be any lifting of the operational restrictions at night, that can only be done in the context of a much, much broader scheme of insulation to affect those who are going to be affected on it. That's what the balanced approach is about. And the idea that residents would give over that function to Fingal County Council, who made the original decision to grant planning permission, is utterly ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous. Nobody else anywhere in Europe has done anything like that. They don't even want the function themselves. You'd have the CEO of Fingal County Council with his planning hat in one room, sorting out the staffing of the noise regulator in the other room. It doesn't even look good from your own point of view, and I'd be utterly sure it will be the subject of judicial challenge later on. We have a lot of amendments which will be tabled at committee stage. We're looking forward to them when they come, but I really put it to you, Minister, this bill is going nowhere unless you start to wake up, if you start to undo the ridiculous, shambolic method in which this bill has progressed so far, and start listening to this side of the House. Because if you don't, we're going to be back to a situation where the reason for the delays on this will rest nowhere but on your door.
Thank you.